Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we discuss if this is going to be a make it or break it season for Giants quarterback Daniel Jones. Why are we talking about this? Well, Hard Knocks is doing a new thing this year where they are doing an off-season Hard Knocks where they are following a team's front office as they kind of navigate through free agency and what players they might contemplate signing in free agency, what guys they might say, hey, it's okay to go into free agency, and then kind of as teams prepare for the draft. And this year, they decided to start following the Giants. And in the very first episode, Joe Shane, the GM for the New York Giants, had some kind of eye-opening quotes about quarterback Daniel Jones, who the franchise paid like $160 million to last year. And they aren't necessarily the most flattering. It isn't necessarily like, hey, Daniel Jones is our guy and he's going to be awesome. It's more like, hey, Daniel Jones still has some stuff to prove in this league, and it's going to be our job this offseason to try and put around basically best suit him and best, fix the offensive line, get him more weapons so that we can figure out what we have in this guy. There's a quote when they were talking about why he didn't want to keep Saquon Barkley. Why would we pay Daniel Jones $40 million to hand it off to a $12 million running back? There's another quote where he's talking about how porous the offensive line was and that Patrick Mahomes couldn't even won with those guys that they had last year. And basically, it's kind of like put up or shut up time for Daniel Jones. And when you're talking about Daniel Jones, I actually think that if you're looking at him this season and you're looking at how the Giants uh, built their team around him heading into this offseason, because they got rid of Saquon Barkley and they now have running back Devin Singletary, who I wouldn't necessarily say is some sort of workhorse running back. They drafted a guy out of Purdue. But other than that, it's kind of all they have at the running back position. So this New York Giants team is going to be dropping back a lot more with their $40 million quarterback. And I actually think this is the year that Daniel Jones could potentially be the most productive and, dare I say, could potentially have a breakout year in the year 2024. And I think the biggest X factor when it comes to this and him potentially having a lot of success or not that much success next season, the biggest X factor when it comes to that is who the Giants decided to select with the sixth pick in the NFL draft. And that is Malik Neighbors, the stud wide receiver out of LSU, who is like lightning quick and has Tyreek Hill like comparisons. When we were going through the draft process. And the reason that I say that he can be like the biggest X factor is if you go through the Giants' tenure with Daniel Jones, they have not really surrounded him with good or above average wide receiver talent. They tried by signing Kenny Golladay once upon a time, but that's been a bust. But other than that, if you go through the years, 2019, Jones rookie year, the leading wide receiver in receptions was Sterling Shepard with 57. The next year, 2020, Sterling Shepard again with 66 receptions. 2021, Evan Ingram, the tight end, led the team with 46 receptions, and the number one wide receiver in catches that year was Kadarius Toney with 39 receptions. The year that they made the playoffs, won a playoff game, beat Minnesota, 2022, Richie James was the number one wide receiver with 57 catches. Last year, even though Jones was hurt for the majority of the season, Wan'Dale Robinson was 60 receptions. Since Daniel Jones has been on the Giants, they have not had a wide receiver that has gotten over 800 yards in a season. My point is, Malik Neighbors has got to be an upgrade over all of these guys. And if you're looking at the history, we actually have a little bit more data over the last 5 years of quarterbacks before they get an elite wide receiver and after they get an elite wide receiver. And it kind of changes our whole view on these guys. I got 5 examples for you here. The first one, Josh Allen, when he got Stephon Diggs. Before Diggs, it's up, this Josh Allen guy, he's got a big arm, but not necessarily the most accurate. We're not sure about his decision-making all the time. There's athleticism, there's some talent here, but we're not really sure what to make him. First year he gets Stephon Diggs. He has 1,500 more passing yards, and he has 17 more passing touchdowns, and he is second in the NFL in MVP voting behind Aaron Rodgers. And since 2020, Josh Allen has perennially been a top 5 MVP vote getter for the Buffalo Bills. And he's proven to be not just a franchise quarterback, not just a top 10 quarterback, but like I said, a top 5 quarterback. All of that started to happen. All of that potential started to be fulfilled when he got Stephon Diggs. The other one, Tua. Tua, the first few years of his career, it looked like an absolute disaster for the Miami Dolphins that they drafted Tua over Justin Herbert. He looked like a bust. And then all of a sudden, one year they draft Jalen Waddle. And then all of a sudden they trade for Tyreek Hill. And then the last 2 seasons, whatever you say about Tua, maybe you don't think he's worth $50 million a year, which I don't know if I do either. He has been one of the most productive NFL quarterbacks. He's had winning records the last 2 years. He's helped lead the Dolphins to the playoffs the last 2 years. Last year, he led the NFL in passing yards. Like, there's definitely something. They salvaged that Tua situation where that's not a complete disaster. Again, they still have to figure out what they want to pay him, but that's a better situation of should we pay this guy or not pay this guy rather than, taking a, doing a coin flip or even a less than 50% chance of getting the next guy right in the draft. So the next guy, Joe Burrow, very first year, the Bengals look like an absolute mess. The offensive line looks terrible. We like T. Higgins, but other than that, there's kind of like a mixed bag as far as weapons go with the Bengals. We're not sure about the defense. And Joe Burrow tears his ACL. And then the offseason conversation for Cincinnati is like, we have the 5th pick. Do we draft Jamar Chase, who is one of the best offensive weapons in the draft? Or do we draft Penei Sewell? Because the logic is, hey, do you draft Penei Sewell so that Joe Burrow has time to throw to someone like a Jamar Chase, or do you draft Jamar Chase? And the risk of doing that is maybe he doesn't have time to throw to him. Well, they draft Jamar Chase, and then the next year, the Bengals make it to the Super Bowl and almost win it. They play in a very close game against the Los Angeles Rams. The next guy, Jalen Hurts, his first year in the league, he's Carson Wentz's backup, gets a little bit of playing time. Next year, full-time starter, goes 9-8. Decent guy, kind of, an average quarterback. We're like, oh, this guy's got something to him, but maybe he's a perennial starter, but maybe not an elite starter. Offseason, they trade for AJ Brown, and then all of a sudden, Jalen Hurts turns into an MVP candidate. He probably wins MVP if he doesn't get hurt late in the 2022 season, and then he takes, with the help of AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and the rest of the weapons that the Eagles had, takes them all the way to the Super Bowl, and again, almost wins it. We have a lot of Super Bowl runner-ups on this list. The last one here that I could say is Kyler Murray, and it was when he got DeAndre Hopkins. It didn't necessarily affect his stats that much, but they did start winning more games when they had DeAndre Hopkins. My point is, all 4 of those guys are either guys that had potential at some point in their career, and then it's like they really popped once they got that number 1 guy, or they're guys we weren't necessarily that sure about, and then they got that number 1 guy, and then we kind of changed our opinion about them. Whether you think they're great or not, but it changed our opinion about them, made us more certain about them being a actually successful quarterback in the NFL. So if Malik Neighbors he doesn't have to be Jamar Chase, but if he's closer to like AJ Brown and Stephon Diggs, is a guy that can get 1,200 to 1,400 yards receiving, Daniel Jones might actually have his most productive year in the NFL so far. And do we see maybe this Giants team, because they buffed up their defense, do we see them potentially make a run at the playoffs? They did make the playoffs, less than a year or in 2022. So it's not that crazy. Do we see that? Honestly, I know I just made the case for it, but I don't think this addition of Malik Neighbors, even if Daniel Jones is more productive, is going to change my opinion on this guy. Guys, I think Daniel Jones has been a decent quarterback in the NFL. I think he's been better than I thought he was going to be, but I also think when he got drafted, he got overdrafted. I don't think he should have been a top 5 or 6 pick or whatever. I think he should have been a second-round pick. And I think that's kind of the potential that he has played with the entire NFL. If you squint, you see something there. You see a guy that's 6'5". You see he's got a little bit of athleticism to him. You see he has a decent arm, but just watching him over the last 5 years, it just feels like something's missing from him. if you listen to the guys that really break down the film, there's times where he will turn down like wide open receivers in favor to throw it to tighter windows. He's not necessarily the best decision maker. His interception to turnover ratio is pretty good, but he has other problems with fumbling the ball. It just feels like he's just average. And even like what we're talking about with Josh Allen, Burrow, it's like you saw something there. You saw something there, and then it finally popped and it got realized and got actualized. With Jalen Hurts, it's like, okay, I know he's got this athleticism and you get him the offensive weapon, and then boom, he's always got that AJ Brown first down going for him, a guy that you can always go to on third down. Even with Tua, it's like I really like the things that he was doing in college. Same thing with Jalen Hurts. But with Daniel Jones, I didn't see it in college, and I haven't seen the flashes at all in the NFL. I don't think he's a bust. I don't think he's a guy that should be a perennial backup, but I think he's more of a bridge guy in a quarterback. And I think if you're paying a guy $40 million a year, that guy's got to cover up things for you. That means you have to be okay with Devin Singletary being um, your running back. That means you have to be okay with you going a little bit cheaper on the tight ends. That means you have to cover up some holes. That's what the money's for. And I don't think he's worth the money. I personally would have. I know this isn't how you run the NFL in the year 2024, but I personally, when you go back to that 2022 season where they made the playoffs and beat the Vikings in the playoffs, I personally thought that the reason they did that was because Saquon Barkley was amazing and he could turn nothing into something. And I think Dayball coached his ass off that year. I think those are the reasons that team won the playoff game that year. I don't think it was because of Daniel Jones. I would have franchise tagged Daniel Jones and signed Saquon Barkley because it would have been easier to get off of a smaller running back contract if you ended up regretting it than a big quarterback contract. And it's like franchise tag him. And then if he proves you wrong, cool. You got a franchise quarterback and you pay him whatever. But I don't think he's a franchise guy. I think the Giants might have a good defense because they do have Kayvon Thibodeau. They got Dexter Lawrence. They got Brian Burns now. They are going to be getting all after the passer, but are we going to see Daniel Jones be one of the most productive NFL quarterbacks, one of the top 10, let's say even top 12 in passing yards and touchdowns? I'm going to believe it when I see it, and I'm saying that because I don't believe that's going to happen. So I know I made the case there, but so there is evidence that could happen. But hey, man, if he does actually become let's say, an above average quarterback, and by above average, I mean top 16 in the league, I do think we have a formula now for quarterbacks where it's like, hey, if you're not sure about him, get him an awesome weapon, trade a first round pick for him, and then if they still can't succeed, it's probably the quarterback's fault. So there you have it, guys. Also, as I was just saying that there at the end, another quarterback that benefited from having a number one weapon was Baker Mayfield last year. Baker Mayfield going to the Bucks and being with Mike Evans, that was huge for him last year. That made Baker a little bit more rich. So there you have it, guys. That's going to do it for this episode here today. If you like this video, help me out. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Those are the best things that you can do to help small channels like this grow. We have been doing this show for a few years now, but we have just started posting stuff on YouTube like the last 6 months or so. So subscribing really helps this show grow and really helps us in the algorithm. Our mission here is to defeat the algorithm. We want to defeat the algorithm. We want to pull out a baseball bat and just beat it into submission. So there you have it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you next time.